Turning now to one of our top stories, the impeachment battle raging in Washington. CBS News Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett is at the White House. He's joining me now with the very latest. So glad you are joining us, Major, because I have questions for you.
Okay, go ahead.
So
Fire away, Anne-Marie.
The White House says that the president has been denied certain protections promised in the Constitution. That's part of the argument for the White House saying we are not going to cooperate with any of this. But isn't part of the problem is that, in fact, the Founding Fathers didn't really say much about the impeachment inquiry or impeachment process? Is there anything in the Constitution that reinforces this argument?
Well, there's Supreme Court precedent, and that is an intervening fact that the White House cites and does have footnotes for in its lengthy letter to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. And that is to say, under an impeachment inquiry, the president does have certain rights to cross-examine witnesses, have access to evidence, and other things, though that's not a formal criminal trial, that every other American citizen would enjoy if, in fact, they were before the bench. That's a legitimate legal argument from the White House. And the White House is also correct to say in every previous impeachment inquiry, there has been a House vote to authorize that inquiry. It happened with Andrew Johnson, it happened with Richard Nixon, it happened with Bill Clinton. And there's, I think, a key phrase worth noting in the letter, Anne-Marie, the political accountability of that vote. The White House is driving at not just the precedent. History tells us that this is what's been done in the past. But for a White House that, to be candid, has never really been a stickler on White House ways or White House or Washington precedent, why is it so hung up on this particular precedent? Well, because it believes it has, at least for now, the political upper hand. It believes that some House Democrats from districts President Trump carried in 2016 might not vote to authorize the inquiry. And even if it passed by a narrow majority, the White House could argue all Republicans are against it, some Democrats are against it. Hey, guess what? Even in losing, we have a bipartisan coalition against the inquiry. The White House also wants House Republicans on record as soon as possible. Why? Because if you're a House Republican, Anne-Marie, and you vote against the House impeachment inquiry, how likely would you ever be to vote in favor of an article of impeachment should it come to that? That's why the White House wants this vote. It wants to lock down House Republicans and pull away a few House Democrats if it can. But on these matters of due process, in previous impeachment inquiries, particularly Nixon and Clinton, all these due process rights were afforded to the White House and White House attorneys. They have not been in this case. So whether you like or dislike this process, like or dislike this president, there is legal justification behind some of the arguments the White House made yesterday.
Okay, that is very interesting. You talked about locking down some of these House Republicans. Also something else that's happening is we're watching the polls shift ever so slightly sort of in favor of continuing this process. So the letter also talks about the fact that the effect of impeachment is to overturn the popular will of the voters. And essentially, if an impeachment is successful, if the vote is successful, that's basically what it does. It rips up the outcome of the election. It certainly seems, though, like what the White House is choosing to focus on is not what the president may or may not have done, but the process and the outcome of the process. That's the strategy here.
Sure. And every White House in impeachment procedures before has made this case. And I was going back, Anne-Marie, yesterday looking through some of the floor speeches during Bill Clinton's impeachment process. Then the leader of the House Democrats, Richard Gephardt, called this the most radical constitutional maneuver that can be taken because, as he said then, defending President Clinton, you are trying to overturn the last election. And that's essentially what an act of impeachment is. It is saying this president must be removed from office, and the popular will of the people expressed to put him in office must be overturned. It's the House of Representatives interposing itself in between the last presidential election and the future service in office of the sitting president. That's a very big deal. But in every previous case, the House of Representatives have said the conduct of the president is so threatening to the rule of law or the good conduct of the office that the House must take this step. So that is an argument this White House is making. You're trying to overturn a popular vote. Not yet arguing on the facts or the underlying allegations, which takes us back to our first question. The White House says we're not going to have that argument because you don't even give us basic due process procedures to pursue evidence, cross-examine witnesses, or subpoena our own witnesses. So we're not even going to go there. We're just going to talk about how radical this act is and allege that you don't even have the political will to authorize it in the first place. And to your underlying point, Anne Marie, poll numbers in favor of the impeachment inquiry at the national level have shifted in favor of it. So the White House says, look, if you've got all that polling data, go ahead, take your vote. Let's see what you actually believe about the underlying politics. The White House still believes in a lot of these districts that Democrats currently occupy, that President Trump won in 2016, there's still hesitation about this.
All right, I want to give you another section of this letter. Third section of the letter says that the president's lawyers are saying that there's no legitimate basis for this impeachment inquiry. And in the letter, they write that Congressman Adam Schiff recited parodied versions of the controversial Ukraine call summary during a Capitol Hill hearing. And it's true, he did sort of paraphrase and in kind of gangster speak, but we all saw the partial transcript of the conversation, and so we know what the president had been suggesting, and so we know exactly the facts. So you can't kind of argue the facts because the White House has been pretty open with it. What is with this focus on Adam Schiff? They called him Captain Kangaroo, presiding over a kangaroo court. What's the strategy in focusing on him?
Well, the White House wants a character to assail and to rally its supporters around. And I would say this is one of the weaker components of the letter. I said in the previous answer to your question that there are some very legitimate due process and legal claims the White House asserts in its letter. Complaining about Adam Schiff, the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, is not one of them. Any White House saying, well, I don't like that particular chairman, and I don't like his tactics, and I don't like what he did at the podium, that isn't a legal argument. It's a political one. And yes, you can make it, but it has no underlying foundation. Federal courts are not going to look at that and say, oh, yes, that chairman's bad. He did something that was kind of politically injurious to the president, hurt his feelings, and for that reason, we're going to side with the White House. That's a largely irrelevant argument in the context of the law. But it's a political argument. The president wants a nemesis. He wants someone that his supporters can focus on as the bad person, the bad guy in this. And that's why Schiff is emerging, Chairman Schiff is emerging as a target of this White House, because the president has a pretty adept sense of how to frame a narrative. He's the president. He wants a bad guy to focus his attention on, and that of his supporters. Adam Schiff, new nominee, bad guy.
So listen, the Democrats have come out and said, listen, some Democrats have certainly come out and said, part of our role is to perform oversight. This is obstruction. This is stopping us from doing what we are legally obligated to do. But I got to wonder, is there any recourse for the Democrats? We've seen, in a number of these hearings, people show up, not answer questions, declare executive privilege when many legal scholars have said there's no such thing. And you know what? Nothing happens.
Right. So you're onto something there, Anne Marie. Grievances with White House refusal to cooperate and participate in standard congressional oversight is part of the backdrop of this impeachment struggle. House Democrats have been deeply frustrated by this White House's refusal in lots of other areas of policy to provide documents, to provide evidence, to provide witnesses when Congress was carrying out, going back again to federal law and precedent, legitimate, court-sanctioned congressional oversight. And those grievances and that anger about the White House and this administration rebuffing House Democrats in standard oversight procedures has led to a state of kind of bitterness about this White House and saying, look, don't come to us with all of these crocodile tears about due process and lack of rights for the president when you have consecutively and strenuously ignored previous precedent about congressional oversight. Both sides have grievances, and they're becoming much, much more bitter. And it's going to be something the federal courts are going to have to sort out, Anne Marie, because where we are right now is the White House is saying we will not cooperate, we will not recognize any requests for documents, witnesses, or subpoenas under this impeachment inquiry. And the House saying that constitutes obstruction of justice on its face. And then they're going to have to sue. And guess what? The federal courts are going to have to try to sort this out.
And it drags on into the election. Major Garrett, thank you very much.
Sure.
So don't forget to check the latest updates on this story on our live blog at cbsnews.com/impeachment.